is recording. Well, I'll just go then. Hello. If you're hearing this, that means something about you is special enough that you were led to this tape by forces unknown. I really have no idea how this place does what it does, but I know that if it let you find this thing, then you must be some A-list Joe. The higher-ups that think he's handed me a gag order the other day to keep everything on this tape tip-top secret. But given that you're holding said tape, then you can see that obviously I'm not one for following rules. This museum has something special about it, but there are people looking to suppress that, and I can't let that happen. I honestly don't know if you'll be able to understand anything that's going on here, but if you can, then I need you to do something for me. Tour this museum. I know. That's not exactly what I would have expected Strange Team to say either, but trust me when I say the payoff is worth it. I don't have much more time today, so just follow the tour. I'll be back to check in on you soon. Alright, since I have no idea if anyone even has this tape, I'll just assume that you're still listening. This first room covers the oldest parts of our history, that is, the human's history. There's no telling who or what might be listening, so I'll just continue like you and I are different species and try to pretend like that isn't a bonkers thing to say out loud. Go to the first exhibit on your right and interact with the podium in front of it to pull up the exhibit dialogue. This first showcase is about the evolution of humans from tiny little microbes up to full-blown crystal-crunching schmucks. I had to put some flowery language on this one to please the higher-ups, but the cavemen that us humans came from were pretty brutal. Anyway, move on to the next exhibit to your left when you're done here. The next exhibit kind of continues from what I was saying before and talks about the kinds of weapons early humans were prone to using. They basically worshipped these crystals they found in the caves they lived in and decided to start using them in their fighting too. They used them for everything, so don't let the quiz fool you. Move on to the next exhibit after you answer the question. Exhibit number 3 describes, in my opinion, the beginning of the end. Of course, I'm just some grouchy cynic, but as soon as the early humans began settling was when things started going downhill. I put this exhibit together to show the recreations I made of the vegetables we ate. Pretty impressive, right? I'm going to assume you agree with me. Anyway, you know the drill. Go to the next exhibit when you're finished here. The final exhibit shows off a map one of the excavation teams uncovered at a regional dig site. It's one of the ones the early humans used as they traveled the planet to seek this really sudden wanderlust a bunch of them got all at once. Speaking of maps, I'm sure you've noticed the big one in the middle of the room. If you've got rocks in your head, or just haven't been paying attention, you might not notice that it's been changing as you've been answering these questions. Feel free to take a look before you go to the next room. I worked real hard on these centerpieces. Gotten through the first room then? You might just have what it takes to see what I've got to offer. Okay, so this next room is going to be a bit more in-depth than the last one, because it has to do with stuff in human history closer to my time. Stuff like early nations, all the way up to public transportation and energy. This room has a different setup than the last one, so no questions for you to answer this time around. Just read the exhibits and see if you can spot what I've set up in here. first exhibit here is a point of pride for me. You have no idea what it took for me to get these flags in such great condition. These 4 flags belong to the first 4 most powerful nations on my planet that ended up, well, you'll find out in the next room. The leader of this one country, Miss Fane, was a real bougie tool. He only gave money to the poor so there wouldn't be any more poor people. But since everyone knew he loved his money more than life itself, there wouldn't have been much surprise if he'd taken less than moral methods with his dismantling of poverty. The second exhibit was a bit divisive when I made the proposal to my higher-ups. They didn't like that I was, quote, promoting speciesism and violence by talking about what a genocidal maniac the leader of Two Bits was. I was eventually forced to tweak it to focus more on her strategical ability so they would approve, but believe you me, she was the worst kind of leader. There are accounts of extreme prejudice even within her own regime, but no one talked about them under threat of force from her brutal secret police. Contrary to the last exhibit, the third one here was approved more quickly than any other I proposed. It makes sense. People basically worship the guy that invented a way to process Temenos crystals into a potent energy source. But while I was doing research for this showcase, I found some pretty strange stuff. Old tomes filled with freaky runes and diagrams, correspondence between Kavarkeen officials talking about how their leaders seemed to have a few screws coming loose, that sort of thing. I didn't think much of it at first, but stuff about this specific crystal kept coming up, and I nearly scrapped the exhibit entirely. The final exhibit in this room covers a more narrow category, that of personal and public transportation. The nation of Zora was the pioneer of early mobility technology, and that let them expand really quickly. They were hungry for resources because their territory was fairly barren to begin with. Expansion became the main goal of Zora's leadership, but that allegedly became more like world domination when the specific Zora leader took power. She was pretty ruthless in both politics and war, and under her, the Zora Empire became synonymous with exceptional power and cunning.
Yes, my lord, of course. These elves have no idea what we're planning. No one else can hear what you speak because I'm your chosen emissary. Right? Right. Of course. Soon the entire world will worship you as I do.
These damn reprobates. Don't they see the menace that the poor present? If we don't do something about them, then those dirty mongrels will surely realize they outnumber us. They must be completely brain dead to be living like that. We'll be fine.
Once again, I'm forced to sit at the same table as a bunch of foreigners. Like they're on the same level as me. If I had my way, I would wipe these lesser beings out with my blade. But they have the resources my people need to keep our crusade going. I'll deal with them for now, but when I get the chance...
Those fools. All of them. None of them have my vision. None of them can see what it would mean for Zora to conquer all. The peace it would bring. The prosperity that would abound. Well, no matter. I'll just have to make them see eye to eye like I always do.
This last room covers much more recent history for me. I lived through almost all the events showcased in this one, so I'll let you know right now that I might have some opinions on what the exhibits say. I know you're thinking, but aren't you the guy who set up all these in the first place? And yes I was. But when you've got a boss like mine breathing down your neck, you don't have much choice in the matter. The centerpiece in this room is less of a thinker than the last two were, so when you see things start happening, just have fun with it. My mother was actually an artist. She helped build the machine talked about at this exhibit, and loved using it to have statues made of things no one else would make statues of. Flowers, food. Hell, she even used my dirty laundry basket as her muse once. Let me tell you, trying to figure out why I couldn't pick my clothes up so I could wash them was real embarrassing. How did I not notice the damn thing was made of marble? Anyway, this exhibit is about people repurposing old industrial and military surplus for cultural use, mostly statue and sculpture making. After the establishment of the world government, things were pretty good for a few years. Even as against it as my folks were at first, they eventually admitted that the leadership was doing good work. It wasn't until the police found out those flyers that groups used to attract members were really encoded with secret messages of dissent and rebellion that people started getting hurt. I remember my mother being part of the local food pantry at the time. She was always out of the house those days. After the news broke, she was terrified to leave, so I had to pick up this job as a curator to help pay the bills. You have no idea how hard it was to convince my boss to let me put this one up. I thought there was no way he'd approve any evidence of dissent in his perfect history, but when I spun it to seem like the protests were these huge violent riots that were quelled peacefully, he was totally on board. In reality, they were these tiny gatherings that most people considered a nuisance more than anything, because no one wanted to face the facts this research presented. The crystals we rely on so much are killing us. There's not much left to say, really. With this last exhibit, we're caught up with modern day. I keep thinking about how silly this all feels. I have no idea if anyone will even listen to this while it still matters. But if you are, just make sure to hit up the gift shop on your way out. So you managed to pick up on my little clue, huh? That planet has a tiny receiver inside that gives you access to this final part of my recording. But I still don't know if I can trust you. All I'll tell you is that that planet there gives you access to a very special part of the museum that'll make all this make sense. See if you can figure out what to do with it, and I'll see you when, or if, you manage it. Wow, you actually got it. I honestly don't think the museum would have let you get this far if you weren't a good candidate, so I guess it's time I let you in on the little secret I've cooked up for you here. Remember earlier when I mentioned that this museum has something special about it that my bosses wanted me to keep secret? Well, in the very room you're standing in are a pair of portals that lead into the future. You heard me right, the future. That's not the only crazy thing. After the portals were discovered, this museum appeared in place before anyone could go check them out. It's obviously not some normal building if it sprung up overnight, but my boss wanted me to treat it like one. Fill it with exhibits, he told me. So I did. I created every exhibit you see in here, and I'm setting up this recording as a kind of key. For some reason, I was the only one given access to the portals after the museum appeared, and as far as I can figure, it must have something to do with my opinions on the way things are being run around here. I decided to record all of my thoughts and feelings about the exhibits, that anyone who came here after me would know exactly what they needed to find the portals for themselves, even after my bosses told me to lock them away. But I have no idea what kind of person would be the first to find this tape, so I had to make it subtle. Sorry if any of my setups were hard on you. I had to make sure you weren't some goon trying to take the secrets of this place for yourself. But now that you've unlocked this part of the tape, I know that you must be that A-list Joe I always believed you were. See, this place was trying to warn me what might happen if us humans don't change our consumptive and destructive ways. That's probably what it's trying to do for you, too. Assuming you're not human, that is. So, what next? Well, you'll soon be given access to the pair of portals. I don't know exactly what things will be like when you go through, but I do know that they always jump ahead a fixed amount of time. The only indication of what might be on the other side is a word above each one. Change on one, and tradition on the other. I've been scratching my head trying to figure out what they mean, but I know that I don't like what I see going through them. Since the time they warp you is fixed, you'll be ahead of where I was last time I jumped in. So maybe you'll find something better on the other side. Who knows? Anyway, you got a choice to make now, my friend. Use all the knowledge you gain from wherever you end up to make your world a better place. It'll be hard, but if you pick the right one, you may just find out how worth it the work could be. If I can, I'll try and let you know how it goes on my end. For now, I'll be signing off. See you when I see you, pal. Hello. this will be my final recording on this device before we take off tomorrow morning. It's been about 50 years, I think, since I first started recording on this beat-up old tape player. It's become a tradition of mine to leave a message here whenever something big happens, so I think I'll just recount everything from the beginning for posterity. Things were really bad in the beginning. When energy prices started rising, people took notice fast. The government tried to downplay it, but enough people questioned them that an inquiry was made into how our consumption was affecting us. Research proved that we were slowly killing not just ourselves by burning these crystals, but the planet as well. If things didn't do a complete 180, we'd be screwed. A lot of folks started to make up for their destructive ways. There was pushback from traditionalists who only cared about their own comfort, but even with all their bloviating about it being a hoax and anti-government propaganda, we still managed to convince a good chunk of them to help out, even if it was only to see with their own eyes what our traditions were doing to the planet. Seeing that first human sick in the hospital with a disease caused by working in a Temenos crystal refinery really put it into perspective for people. Because of his exposure to the dust and fumes for hours every day, he had contracted early something we were all going to get eventually. That was the day everything turned on its head, just like we needed. It certainly wasn't easy completely replacing a globally dominant Uber regime. People, friends, died. But for the most part, the revolution was peaceful. The people were made their own masters and began taking meaningful action against the damage the previous leadership had inflicted on the world. There was a huge technology and culture boom. The planet started to heal. But something was still missing for us. We'd ousted the jerks that were killing us through their negligence and had finally started undoing it all, but we wanted more. Without realizing, a lot of our research efforts grew towards trying to get off planet. Getting out into space became a priority, and soon enough there were plans to leave, to map the stars like our ancestors mapped the planet. We wanted to start celebrating again the traditions we'd forgotten. And that brings us to right now. I'm getting ready to set off on my own pilgrimage tomorrow and become a roamer like my like my ancestors. It fills me with pride to know that I'll be leaving this planet better than when I arrived, and now I can look towards the stars with confidence. Alright, I better get to bed. Got a big day tomorrow. I don't know if anyone's listening anymore. If there's even anyone left to listen. But I think I'm just gonna talk for a little bit. try and make sense of how everything changed so quickly. I couldn't really give you an exact moment when I knew things were getting really bad. I remember when I first noticed the prices of energy going up about 50 years ago, I didn't think much of it. After a while, everyone else started to notice too, and they didn't stop rising. The government told us that there was nothing to worry about, and that was enough to quell most people's worries, but some weren't convinced. News broke after a month that researchers calculated our remaining crystal supply versus consumption rate. We had so little time. It was chaos after that. Folks started to recall that first study way back when that talked about all the harm burning the crystals was doing, and all of a sudden the government's words on it wasn't good anymore. There were protests again, small ones, just like last time, because most people thought it was all some kind of anti-peace hoax. But instead of letting them peter out like before, they brought the military in. People were dying in the streets, but everyone else just continued to live their lives, consuming more and more until one day, there was nothing left. The world government that had worked so hard for control shattered before our eyes. Territories formed that decimated each other for control over the last dregs of resources on our planet. Endless wars and death. But even if everyone suddenly decided to be very peaceful all at once, there isn't anything left. All the pollution in our air and water poisoned us, and we had no idea until our friends and neighbors dropped dead. I haven't seen another human in weeks. In the end, it was our inability to change that killed us. People decided their comfort was more important than reversing the lasting damage we were doing to our planet and ignored all the warning signs. There's nothing we can do now. All that's left is to wonder what could have been. I'm so tired. I think I'm just gonna close my eyes for a little bit.